Witcher fanfiction, short story, In the Silence of the Tent. Written by Irene Marras. In the silence of a tent, Elaine's departure was quiet, peaceful, as the woman herself had been. Riana sat beside the woman's bed, holding her hand in hers, counting her ever-slowing breaths. The air in the tent was full of herbs, dried lavender and chamomile, but their scent could not mask the life leaving from Elaine. The last flames of the campfire fluttered under a worn cloth hung at the door's mouth to keep the cold from creeping in. But Riana still felt the cold, not outside, but within herself. "Not much longer, my dear," Elaine whispered, her fingers lightly squeezing Riana's. Riana said nothing. She couldn't. She had always known this day would come. Elaine had been ill for a long time, her strength slowly but inexorably draining away, and no cure could help her now. Everyone in the camp had known it. Elaine herself knew it. But Riana? She wasn't ready. "There is nothing to fear," Elaine whispered in a weak voice, her lips curving into a faint smile. "You know that, don't you?" Riana blinked, trying to hold back her tears. She swallowed and nodded, but knew it was a lie. Elaine slowly turned her head and looked her in the eye. "You are my greatest pride, Riana," he said softly. "You always have been. And you are more than you know." Riana shook her head. "Don't talk like that. You need your rest." Elaine laughed weakly, a laugh that was now a faint echo of what it had once been. "I'll rest soon, my dear." The silence stretched between them. Outside, the camp had fallen silent. Somewhere in the distance, someone was tuning his instrument, but the notes were soft, as if honoring the moment. Then Elaine's breathing became ragged. Her eyes slowly closed, and her hand in Riana's slowly lost its warmth. Riana held her breath. She sat there, counting breaths until there were none. Elaine was gone. But in the tent, among the warm herbs and the quiet fire, Elaine was still smiling. Life went on. That was something Riana quickly understood. Elaine's death had touched many, but the travelers were used to loss. It was part of life, part of being on the road. People came and went, but the shows went on. And so did Riana. She performed as before, singing at the evening, playing the lute in the village markets and telling stories she had learned as a child. But now they no longer had the same warmth. Elaine had been her anchor. Without her, nothing felt the same. For the first few weeks, Riana had waited for the grief to pass, for something to fill the void left by Elaine's passing. But days turned into weeks, and more often she found her thoughts drifting elsewhere. She no longer felt she belonged here. One evening, when the camp had stopped outside a small village, Riana made a decision. She sat alone in her tent, a lute in her lap, but did not play. Instead, she stared at the small object in her hand, Elaine's old herb jar, still full of dried herbs. It was the last thing she had left behind. She knew now she couldn't stay. She was no longer just a performer. She wasn't just a storyteller or a musician. Elaine had taught her how to heal, how to read the signs of herbs and nature, how to feel people's bodies and see their wounds. Why would she perform in the markets when her hands could do so much more? She stood up, put on her traveling clothes and pulled her cloak over her shoulders. The camp was quiet, the others had already retired to bed. She knew that if she told them she was leaving, some would try to stop her, especially Boris, who had been her friend since childhood. But she couldn't let anyone hold her back. She left behind only a small note, placed in the doorway of the tent. "I have to go. This is no longer my place." Then she disappeared into the night, not yet knowing where her path would lead. The forest felt different than before. Riana had always liked the peace of nature, but now, walking alone, she noticed its ruthlessness. The nights were cold, food was scarce, and although she was used to living on the road, she had never before walked without direction. She didn't know what she was looking for. Until she found them. She smelled blood before she saw anything. It was a sharp, metallic scent that wafted through the leaves. The birds in the treetops were silent, as if afraid of something. Riana instinctively lowered herself low and moved silently forward. She'd seen signs of battle before, but when she stepped into the clearing, it still made her heart skip a beat. There were bodies lying on the ground. Some belonged to human soldiers, but some were elves, and she knew who they were. Scoia'el. The whole square was filled with death. But something moved. Riana clenched her fist, but drew no weapon. She was no fighter. At the foot of a nearby fallen tree lay an elf, still trying to catch his breath. The man's chest heaved heavily, and there was a deep, bloody gash in his stomach. Riana acted before she could think. She ran to the wounded elf, knelt beside him and began to examine the wound. The blood was still gushing, but the man was alive, barely. "You are not one of us," the elf gasped, his gaze suspicious. "No," Riana replied. "But that's not important now. You need to stay alive." Biting her lip, she grabbed a piece of cloth from her bag and pressed it firmly over the wound. The man cursed, but couldn't resist. "Why are you helping us?" a voice asked from somewhere behind her. She looked up to see another elf standing at the edge of the forest, an arrow in his string. One of the survivors. Riana had been caught in the middle of something she didn't yet understand. But she did not hesitate. "Because I can," she said simply. "So shut up and let me concentrate, or you'll have to bury your comrades with the others." Elf appraised her for a long moment. His gaze traveled between Riana's loot, her clothes, and her bloody hands. "Are you a healer?" the man asked. "I am," Riana admitted. The other elf glanced at his wounded comrade and then back at Riana. "If you save him, we owe you." Riana turned her gaze back to the wounded man. "Fine?" And just like that, with one decision, Riana had taken her first step towards a life she had never planned.